Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business Brew. I'm your host, Bill Brewster. This episode is brought to you by Koyfin. Koyfin is one of the fastest growing platforms for financial data and analytics to research stocks and understand market trends. I discovered them thanks to their very passionate users, many of which are my friends. Imagine a Bloomberg-lite with tons of high quality fundamental data, a powerful graph engine that can show it all clearly, and a user interface that doesn't look like it was built in the 1990s. If you're an individual investor, research analyst, portfolio manager, or financial advisor, do yourself a favor and check Koyfin out. You won't regret it. Sign up for free at koyfin.com. That's KOYFIN.com. This episode features a person named Seth Porges. Seth is the creator of one of my favorite documentaries that I've seen in a very, very long time called Class Action Park. You may wonder to yourself, well, why is a documentary maker on Bill's podcast? My answer to your wonder is because I want him to be. And also, and more importantly, because I have a promise to you, the listener, that I think that you will enjoy the show. And the reason that I think that it ties into the business part of the show is he bootstrapped the movie, or film, I should say. He went out, did the whole thing himself, and the story involves one of the craziest businesses I've ever seen in my entire life. And I think y'all should go to HBO Max and check it out. If you don't want any spoilers, I would pause this at the moment and watch the documentary again on HBO Max. It's called Class Action Park. If you don't mind the spoilers, I hope that you enjoy this show. This one requires absolutely no disclaimers, but just in case you need to hear it, I'm going to remind you again to do your own due diligence on anything that you may hear here. Not this episode, but all the episodes. Do your own damn due diligence. All right, without further ado, please enjoy the episode with Seth Porges. And let me know what you think, peeps. Have a good one. All right, Seth Porges, thank you for joining us. How you doing, man?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you. We're going to do something different today. A lot of the times it's investments related, but this one's going to be much more business related. And frankly, I just loved the movie that you made, and I wanted to talk to you, and I have a podcast, and that's the excuse. And I think that people that listen are going to A, enjoy the conversation, and B, should turn on HBO and go watch it, because it's an amazing, amazing documentary. It's called Class Action Park. And Seth, do you want to give a little bit of your background and kind of how you stumbled across the project? And by stumbled, I mean you went there as a kid, didn't you?
I did, yeah. So it was on HBO Max specifically. It can be a little confusing, I know. But, Class Action Park is our documentary about a place called Action Park. And Action Park was the most extreme, most dangerous, most insane, most ill-conceived amusement park that probably ever existed, but probably also the most fun. And I think that tension is what makes this topic so undeniable, so interesting, something that just like hooks itself into anybody who comes across its brain. Because on one hand, we as humans, I think, want to survive. But on the other hand, something about us is drawn to danger. People do extreme sports because they're extreme, right?
Yeah.
And this was an amusement park that resembled the X Games more than it did a trip to Disneyland. And I came across this place, as you mentioned, because I went there as a kid. Not many times, a couple times, but enough that these memories and these stories, these things I saw, the urban legend seeming whispers you hear in line for the bathroom, just implanted themselves in my brain. And as an adult, I was like, what was the deal? What was real? Have to look into this. And
yeah,
that's where we are today. Yeah.
When you walked in, so first of all, for people that don't know, this is an action park that a man basically created the rides by drawing on a napkin and then testing on human subjects.
Yes.
Many of those subjects were teenage employees.
Yeah, I think almost all of them probably were. If you were like a minimum wage employee, I'm talking like it's 80s, so like $3-4 an hour, right? The owner of the park would stand next to these experimental contraptions and wave $100 bills in the air. And if you had what it took to go down this thing and see what it did to the human body, you'd walk away with $100. And that's like a ton of money for a 17-year-old in 1983 New Jersey, Like, I get it. But this place, the rides themselves are fascinating. Not the only fascinating thing about this place, but you have these rides and you've never seen anywhere else and you will never see anywhere else. And a lot of that has to do with the fact Action Park, just in sort of the evolutionary tree of a modern water park, was really early. It was like the third or fourth, what we'll call modern water park in the country. And so nowadays you go to a water park, you kind of know what you're going to get. They get these kind of off-the-shelf rides that big vendors sell these parks. They all kind of got the same types of rides. Back then, they were just like, what do we want to build? Let's figure it out. And so it basically was like these dudes playing roller coaster tycoon, just like messing around, throwing ideas at the wall, sending down bribed teenagers to try them out. Some worked, some didn't. Some of them were created by in-house employees who were not engineers, were not designers. Some were created by people who aspired to be ride designers that the owner of the park would find at like industry conventions. Oh, yeah, that's right.
They just like randomly pitch him ideas, right? And
yeah.
Like, yeah, I think I could do that.
Yeah, like he would go to like amusement industry conventions and you'd have like the big booths with like the mainstream ride makers and the vendors and all those folks. And then you'd have like the tables in the back corner of the convention center and it'd be just some guy with a doodle. He's never built it. There's no prototypes, but he's like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put a person into an orb and roll that orb down the side of a hill. And that was
probably the craziest. That was probably the craziest story that you had in there.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a ride. That stick out. One, the loop slide and what it did to people. And the fact that he tested it on dummies, and once they stopped coming out dismembered, he offered $100 to a human to go down it. That was terrifying. Two was if you were in deep shit with the scheduler, you were watching the pool because people would constantly almost drown. And three was the most terrifying was the ball that just rolls down a hill and crosses the highway.
Well, if you were in bad with the scheduler, or you just like weren't one of the cool kids more than anything. It wasn't just like the pool. It was you're in charge of the pools that the motorboats would go on. And that was the worst job because those motorboats would just constantly be leaking oil and gas. And the water was infested with snakes because it was a swamp. And people would constantly have their boats flipped. And you have to jump into this oily, gassy, snake-filled water. Worst job. You know, you'd be like begging to work at the chlorinated pool after that. But so these guys would come up with ideas, and the owner of the park, this very interesting individual named Gene Mulvihill, would basically be like, oh, that sounds cool. Let's just see if we can build it. No prototypes, no nothing. And so one of the rides we talked about in the film was something called the Man in the Ball in a Ball, which is the name of my prog rock band, I think. And this ride was just like a big hamster ball that it, like an American Gladiators, right? You get into this thing and just roll down the side of the hill. And when they went to test it out, it was like 105 degrees that day. And this track was built out of PVC pipe. And the PVC pipe just like broke in the heat, like expanded and broke. And the ball rolled off the track and just rolled all the way down the hill over the highway that ran through the middle of the park, because a major highway ran through the middle of the park, crossed the parking lot. Amazing, no cars hit it, and then just like ended up in the swamp. And it just sat there for years until years later, employees fished the ball out, painted it, and turned it into a feature of the ski resort's terrain park.
That's crazy. Absolutely insane that a human was in that ball.
Oh, yes.
So one thing that I thought about when you were doing this, I thought you did a very good job. I found the psychology of the movie very interesting. I thought you did a really good job. I guess, how should I say this? Not like making Gene like a true villain, but also not like making him the protagonist. How did you think through something?
Well, it's all about being, we did think about that. It's all about being honest to the truth of the story. Is the truth. I don't believe that anybody's like a monster or villain, really. People do things for reasons. They think they're the hero of their own story. Gene didn't view himself as a bad guy. He, on one hand, wanted to make a lot of money, didn't care what rules he broke, what toes he stepped on. But he also, to some degree, wanted to make a really fun place. And the truth of Action Park and what makes it so interesting and so complex and so lasting in its legacy is that people went there. It was a dangerous place, but people still had a really formative and really good time. And so many people from New Jersey who grew up going to this park, on one hand, will say this place never should have existed. I can't believe this place existed. It was dangerous, but I'm so glad I went. And I think that to us was sort of the key to understanding this place, because so many things, I think, kind of have those, can coexist between those two worlds. We love them and we hate them. We fear them and we respect them, whatever it is. And I think that's really important because that is the human experience as a human condition. It's also honest to the story of this park and the people who went there. If we had just said, this place is a death trap and been very somber and serious about it, I think the people who went there, and it was a big part of their lives, would have kind of been dismissive of the movie. I think they would have felt like, you know what, like, yada, 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 I had a good time. And I think it's really important to understand, like, even if that sounds callous, it's the truth. You know, this place was both of these things. And I think so many things are both these things. And so many things about growing up in the 80s were these things. Because Action Park existed in a world in which kids didn't really have the same parental supervision they have today. Didn't have cell phones where parents could track them or call them anytime. They were disappearing to be home at night, you know? And so if you didn't have Action Park, maybe you had a quarry you swam in. Maybe you had like abandoned train tracks you're playing in. Maybe you're building just a really stupid BMX ramp and breaking your leg for fun. Yeah. And the fact is that kids in that generation, and I think it comes from something in all of us, were drawn to danger. We're drawn to the sense of one-upsmanship that the park fostered. And the movie to us wasn't about the park or Gene so much as a generational experience of growing up in the 80s. And the strange relationship I think people have looking back now, Gen Xers in particular, with their childhood, where they're simultaneously, on one hand, grateful and thrilled and love the experiences they had, but at the same time would do anything possible to keep their own kids from enduring them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it almost seems as though it was negligent to let your kids go there, but also, like everyone that was interviewed, the closing of the movie I thought was really interesting psychologically, because how many of them said like, well, if you couldn't take it, you're a pussy. Right. And it's they spent the whole movie saying how dangerous this place was. And then you saw the smile on their face when they delivered that last line.
Absolutely. But I think you need to, and I think some people didn't really understand what I think some of the interview subjects meant by those sorts of things. They weren't saying like, you're a wimp, you suck if you can't do these things. What they're doing is they're kind of, I think, looking back and trying to recreate the mentality that existed then with sort of a much more mature and knowing idea about the true repercussions of it. And I think they're being honest about what was going through their heads when they were 13 and 14 years old, which is very different what's going through their heads now that they're 40. And I think if you actually listen to the words that people are saying when they look back, you realize that this appreciation, even this level of nostalgia, comes from a place of trauma, I think. It comes from a place of survivorship. It comes from a place of scars. And it's people who I think are very, very aware that of the dark side of their own childhoods and the dark side of many people of this era's childhoods. But at the same time, that was their childhood. And everybody looks back fondly at what their childhoods are. And I think sort of the trap of nostalgia, which I think a lot of the people in our film very much recognize, is that it allows us to kind of gloss over and fuzz over things that are objectively horrifying because they are what made us and we are happy about who we are.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the trick to understanding not necessarily my movie, but what was going through the heads of the people we interviewed, was that they are saying these things in fondness of the park, but that fondness comes from a place, an earned place of trauma.
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. I think the trauma part, it is really interesting. Like I think that what makes your movie or documentary work is you've got like a very good understanding of the psychology behind why the movie would work. And I would imagine for people that don't know, you bootstrapped the movie, right?
Yes, correct.
So that must have been, I would think, I mean, how much risk were you taking when you bootstrapped it?
I mean, a ton of risk, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime, we're very fortunate in that our like DIY independent scrappy little production found a wonderful home in HBO Max. It can be seen by a lot of people as a result. The truth of the film industry, and I think many other industries, which people kind of go off with a wing and a prayer and throw, whether it's a restaurant or a tech startup or anything, is that it usually doesn't work out like that. It just usually doesn't. It's a numbers game. But I had, I think, the confidence in the story. I knew that this was interesting to me and would be interesting to a lot of other people. I knew that I was the right person to tell this story in many ways. I'd been researching for a long time. I made a short on the topic a number of years ago. And I knew if I didn't do it, somebody else would. And,
somebody else tried, right? Johnny Knoxville sort of tried.
That was a scripted like comedy film that was, loosely inspired by the existence of Action Park, but didn't really have much to do with the actual characters or the story. So I think it's different. And honestly, like what happened is that I wanted to get this film made through more traditional means, meaning have other people produce it and pay for it. That's what sort of I think the plan A usually for any filmmaker. But the wall I kept running into was that comedy film, the aforementioned film, had been released just a couple years before and was a financial disappointment. And the way Hollywood, any risk-averse industry tends to work is they look at comps, they look at what data points are out there to say, like, is there a market for this? Could this be a hit? And when the only comp you have is this film that didn't do well, people get very skittish. And what would happen is, we pitch it to people, production companies, networks, whatever, and people would be into the story because it's a great story, but there'd always be somebody along that chain who would get nervous because of the other film had not done well. And I just knew that, the number of people who need an unbroken chain of yeses that are required to get anything produced in film and television, you can't have anybody along that line say no. And I knew there was always going to be some person who said no because of that, which made me realize I kind of had to self-produce it. And so, I was just getting a drink with my friend Chris Charles Scott, who's my collaborator on this project. And we were talking and we just kind of at a bar sketched out on a napkin, like, what would it take for us to get this thing made? He had a really great crew of folks who'd worked on some documentaries with him that were actually available and ready to roll. And a lot of us, put in sweat equity. A lot of us put in our own faith and belief in the project. And I think there's a lot of passion that kind of comes through, and it's a very personal project as a result. And I kind of like how scrappy the film ended up being. I think it feels very personal as a result. It feels a little punk rock. It feels a little DIY.
Yeah, it does. It does feel punk rock. I like the cartoons in it and all that. Yeah. Like, it's very cool.
Yeah, and I like that. And it was also really great to make the movie we wanted to make. It was a very small crew, and we all, were able to make it our movie without zillions of cooks in the kitchen kind of tinkering with it, which often happens when you make a movie.
You had made a short previously, right? That sort of went viral, or did go viral. Is that
sort of? Well, yeah. In 2013, I made, along with some friends of mine, I don't want to take all the credit for that, Matt and Anthony in particular, a short film, web video, you can call it a film even, about Action Park that ended up going quite viral. And the response to that really told me that we need to do a bigger film than this. But more importantly, after that short went out there, all these people just started reaching out to me with their stories, with their home videos, with their whatevers. And I realized that we had scratched the surface, like the jump into cliche territory, the tip of the iceberg, right? Yeah. Like, there was so much more out there that I wasn't aware of. And more importantly, I think there was a different emotional undertone than I was aware of. When we made the short, it was really kind of this like giddy nostalgia, this place was crazy kind of thing. But then as I went deeper over the years after that short and started talking to people and realized this place is absurd, this place is objectively hilarious, this place is incredible, but at the same time, there were victims, and those are real people. And I began to sort of wrestle with that in my own head. And that journey, I think, is sort of mirrored in the film, where the first part of the movie is that sort of like giddy rock and roll roller coaster. But then sort of as I, the filmmaker, and you, the viewer, become more in tune with the underbelly, the truth of the place, your emotions begin to change very, very quickly. And it becomes difficult for both of them to coexist. But I think that coexistence is what the film becomes about. And that was sort of my own journey that I wanted to kind of bring to screen.
Yeah, I think that that's a great way to say it. And as the viewer watching it, I remember thinking to myself, on one hand, this is almost like a comedy. And on the other hand, I think it's like a tragedy. And everything about it, I think, is beautiful. Yeah. But, like, you get into how he didn't even have insurance, right? And he faked his own self-insurance and stuff. And it's like, oh my God, this guy was, the amount of risk that he was creating and not even, accepting the responsibility for, on one hand, is like fucking insane. On the other, I thought you did a really nice job talking about how meaningful that park was to the town and what it meant to the people that work there and everybody around it. Like, it brought economy there. So there's always this tension in the story between almost like dark and light and good and evil. It's interesting.
Yeah. And it's a fun movie to watch in a crowd or with a group, something I haven't had a chance to do too much because of the pandemic. But, we've played outside at times, done some drive-ins, watch it with friends. And it's really interesting to watch it with a group of people who've never seen it before because everybody stops laughing at different moments.
Huh.
I think like they're around an hour into the film in a very quick period of time does I'll just say rather drastic tonal shift, kind of gear shifts from a comedy to a tragedy. And it's hard for people, I think, to at first, people might be like, wait a second, is that funny? Am I supposed to stop laughing now? And it kind of starts to set in and you just sort of hear laughter fizzle out in a couple minutes. And it's a really, I think, fascinating experience. And that's what I really wanted to do, was make a movie where you laughed your butt off, but then you felt a sense of guilt at the reality of what you were laughing at is what we really want to do.
Well, you accomplished it in my household, sir. Well done.
Good. Thank you.
So how did you get so into, I think in order to make a movie this good, you got to have an understanding of psychology. Where's it come from with you? I mean, I've seen some of your talks on the internet. I have a sense that this is either, I think I read your parents are neurologists. Is that right?
They're neuroscientists. Okay. Yeah. Both my parents, everybody in my family, my brother too, actually, they're all neuroscientists except me. That's a little bit different from what you call like psychology, I would say. Yeah. But I am obviously, I think, very interested in what makes us act the way we do, especially when we act in ways that are seemingly counterintuitive. Why do people who know this place is dangerous flock to it? Yeah. What is it about ourselves as humans that makes us drawn like moths to the flame to stupid, insane, especially young people, stupid, insane situations? And I think it's not fair to dismiss that tendency because it's a real tendency, but rather to try to understand it. This is a park that was no secret to people, its safety record. It was all over newspapers. It was no secret to people this was a dangerous place. But the more those stories got out there, the more people went.
Actually wanted to go.
And Gene knew this. The owner of the park understood this. And so he very consciously began to lean into the park's rather dangerous reputation. We have a shot in our movie from one of the TV commercials where there's like a teenage girl at the park just yelling, "It's absolutely insane." They're selling the chaos. They're selling the insanity of it. This is a place that I think it's really interesting to watch this movie now because I think we all now sort of live in Action Park. We live in a world in which the fundamental push and pull of Action Park, which is us as humans and our desire to, on one hand, be safe and secure, and the other, to have a good time and be adventurous, are kind of fundamentally at odds with each other at times. And that today is, I think, the story of 2020 and 2021 is this fundamental pull between, on one hand, safety and security, and the other, this vague sense, I'll put air quotes, of freedom, and doing things just because you can. And I think, very early in the movie, we feature a line from somebody who describes Action Park as a place where, she says, death was expected. Death was built into the number of situations.
It was almost part of the risk calculation that you were taking when you went.
Exactly. It was a place where death was tolerated. And I think to some degree we live in a world now where death is to some degree tolerated, where death is built right into the number situation. How many deaths is it worth it to keep certain businesses open, for example? These are questions we all grapple with today. And I think Action Park kind of presents a template for understanding, people who might be on one side of that debate, understanding the other side, I hope.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a little more frivolous, right, when we're talking about Action Park versus, keeping the economy going. But I really like that.
But I wouldn't say it is, because many of the things, it's like Action, I mean, like you live in Florida, right?
Yeah.
Amusement parks, like one of the very, very early opening up. I'm not saying it was good or bad that they did.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, I'll tell you what, I think I'd be safer in Action Park in 1985 than many amusement parks today in some degree. And I think there's a lot of things, there's unnecessary and there's necessary risk. And I think people are drawn to unnecessary risk because we as humans have a very difficult time seeing ourselves as the folks who will fall victim to those risks, until we actually do. Yeah. And that's what Action Park is about.
Tail risk quite a bit.
Exactly. And I don't think, I'm not talking about like, okay, turning the economy off or on as if it's some binary. I'm talking about doing simple things that people choose not to do. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm saying that this is a fundamental pull push and pull that exists within us, and one I think I wanted to kind of bring to screen.
Yeah, I had not, I mean, until, but right before we turned on the camera or whatever, I hadn't made that connection. Even now, I'm making it more. That's really, that's an interesting, what a great time for this movie to come out.
I truly think, I mean, we made this film mostly before the pandemic hit. We finished it up during the pandemic, and it came out right in the deepest, darkest days of summer 2020, time when people had been indoors but wanting to be outdoors. And I think the movie really hit this incredible time in two ways. One, you could sort of vicariously enjoy this amusement park and water park, and you're stuck inside. But also, I think because these things were on people's minds. It's like, at what point does the basic safety and personal responsibility begin?
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of what Action Park is about.
Huh. What were you doing in the years between when you made the short and when you decided to actually do Action Park?
So my background is I'm a journalist, and I view this film as a piece of journalism. I worked at magazines most of my career. I was an editor at Popular Mechanics and several other places, a columnist for a number of places. I was a freelance writer, and I viewed this story as a story that documentary was just like the right medium to tell it. Is kind of what it was. And I'd written about it quite a bit, but there's something different between reading articles. But Action Park has been a number out there. I've written some of them myself. And then being immersed in home movies and seeing these people and seeing their faces, it's just a different experience. And really one that I feel is very immersive and present. And I wanted to make a film that would take you back, be a time machine that would allow you to live in this and sort of understand the nostalgia for this place.
One of the things that I'm getting at when I ask what you were doing is, how did you decide, like, okay, now is the time that I'm going to make this movie and take that career risk, right? Because you had never done a movie before, and you're going to make it on your own. Like, that's a tough decision to make, but what a reward, huh?
Yeah. I mean, there's no right time for that decision, right? It never is. It was really, I could sense something about the story was bubbling up a lot more. I think more people were talking about it. More people were like sharing the Wikipedia page for Action Park, which is one of the best pages on the entire internet, which everybody should read.
Oh, really?
It was kind of going viral in small ways again and again and again, just the existence of this place, right? Huh. And I just knew, like, if we don't do this now, somebody else is going to do it soon. And, I was with my friend Chris, and we were just talking, and he literally was like, Seth, why haven't you made the Action Park movie? And I told him when I told you about the other film out there, kind of making it very difficult to get made. And he was just like, you know what, man, I've got a crew. I think we can make this ourselves. Let's just do it. And we just sketched it out on a napkin, and we were shooting 2 months later. It was really that quick.
That's awesome. And then once you have the package product, rather than get through all the yeses of, yes, we'll finance this, or yes, we're okay with this concept or whatever, then you have a package that you can go and take and sell to people.
Yeah, and 100%. I mean, and also I knew this was a story that on paper people were going to say no to because the only comp they have is the other film. But I knew that the story was so different that I had to show them it was different. I was like, I have to show you guys that this is something different, is really what I had to do. And also, I am also somebody who, I don't like spending other people's money, taking risks with other people's money. I felt better, honestly, about putting myself on the line and putting somebody else on the line. I felt like it would force me to track every penny and be as thrifty as I could, and it did. And I like the idea of doing this on my own terms with my own friends, in a way where if this all worked out for all of us, we would all be the ones who won, be the ones who succeeded together.
Yeah, that's very cool. My other friend was talking to me the other day about the concept of putting yourself on what they call death ground. He's like researching this concept, but basically it's like, if you have no way out, then you have to fight, right? And if you're doing it with your own people and your own money, you just got to make it work, right? There's no safety blanket in that decision.
No, but there is, I think, a survivor's bias that comes from a story. So I think many people who find themselves on what you call death ground there kind of get caught up in sunk costs and go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper when they should bail.
Yeah.
So you talk to somebody like me where it ended up working out, I can acknowledge that had it not worked out, I would say nobody ever do this. It's a terrible idea. But I truly feel oftentimes, especially in creative pursuits, I think filmmakers oftentimes produce their most personal and interesting work when it matters to them, when something's on the line. M. Night Shyamalan, the very famous filmmaker, he's talked about how, he started making these really terrible movies when he was given hundreds of millions of dollars and nothing mattered anymore. And then he had to kind of go back to the basics. In his last few films, he had to mortgage his house to make. And once he was scared, he started making good work again. I think there's something very interesting about that.
Huh. It reminds me of musicians that come out with just like an incredible first album, and then you get their second and their third, and it's like, all right, this person's
but
just
also,
spending the money.
With music in particular, you got to imagine that first album could have been 15 years of songwriting before they get it. And then it's like, okay, you got 9 months to make another album.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's like, what do you do now? Like all our good stuff's gone. You put it out on the table. So I think music is particularly hard to follow up because it's like, here's all my bangers at first. I think film's a little different because I think film is something that you really learn as you go along. And I hope my next film is better than my first. I hope that I pick up, I learn from experience. And it was a learning experience, but I'm glad that I was able to give myself the space to learn, without, having to answer to anybody.
Yeah. How did you, it's a huge management task. Did you have a mentor? What was that like for you? Was it just fly by the seat of your pants and make it work?
Yeah, but I'm not a total stranger to the industry. I've done some production work and a lot of on-air work on documentaries. And so I knew how it all worked. And also I was lucky to have my collaborator, Chris, who is a dear friend and a great filmmaker who'd made a number of documentaries before and kind of had a little bit of an oiled machine that I could plug into. And so we were able to work together on this. And, it was really fun to work with them. The fact that we're still friends after making this movie, I think says a lot.
Yeah, that's nice.
And I think
that's a risk.
Yeah. And I think, the movie is, I don't want to take all the credit for everything on screen because it was as much his film as mine. And, I'm the one who went to the park and sort of came with the story. But, he's the one who was the outsider and was able to say, what is interesting about the story to somebody who's never heard of this place? And I think this movie is sort of my experience and insider perspective mixed with him being the objective observer going, that's crazy. That's nuts. That's wild. And I think there's a little bit of tension in the film between that may not be obvious to viewer because I think it actually came out very cohesively. But to us, I can literally say like this part of the film is all Chris, this part is all me, thematically speaking or emotionally speaking.
Because as someone that experienced it, you were unable to get your mind to the fact that like this is just batshit crazy, and he was like, no, this is nuts.
No, I understood how batshit crazy it was. Okay. I think that's why I wanted to make it. I think it was more him being able to understand why this was relatable on a core emotional level to people who've never been to the park. Because he himself, he's a couple years older than me. He's, I think, firmly Gen X. I'm elder millennial, we'll say. And he grew up in Texas playing in abandoned railroad tracks, sneaking into tunnels, doing all those things. And he's like, I never heard of Action Park. He said, but listen, I grew up going to my own action park. And that to me was a really important framing for the film, is understanding that this entire generation went to Action Park, even if they never heard of Action Park.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked how you talked about the 80s, and it brought me back to, just literally, go be home when the lights are on, right? And no one's watching. And, now I think about parenting my own kids, and it's like, God forbid they're on the street and no one, and I'm not right behind them. Some lady will walk by and say, are you watching your children? It's like, it's such a different culture.
Absolutely. Yeah.
At what point did you know that you had something? Like when you were making this movie, when were you like, all right, this is dope?
Yeah. There's moments and when you're in the room doing interviews and you hear people say things and you feel an emotion yourself in the room and you think to yourself, if the viewers watching us through their TV screen feel like 1% of what I'm feeling right now, like we have something. You're just hearing people say these insane things and I'm laughing, I'm crying, I'm feeling. And when I feel emotion in the room, and I just hope it's captured on the camera, but it is. I think it usually is more than people think. And it's really, I think I have a pretty good sense of it. If I feel it, I hope you at home feel it too. Yeah.
I definitely felt, I think this is around the time when you say that the film goes a little bit dark, but when the mom is talking about losing her kid, and it's like, oh man, I had this tension between enjoying a story that obviously had real cost to people. And also, even when I promote it and I tell people, am I heroizing a man that sort of played with human life? I don't know, but I know that I liked it.
Yeah. And I think it's, I don't, in any project I'm working on, the easy way out is you watch like a really bad documentary and you hear some like deep voiced narrator go like, crime doesn't pay, kids. Like, this is a bad guy, monster. And I don't think that's fair to people's human experience, because like people do things for reasons, good reasons, bad reasons, selfish reasons, selfless reasons. And I think it was important to treat all of these people as people, as, the victims, the people who caused the victims to be victims, and to understand the place this park had in the psyche, the economy, the lives of millions and millions and millions of people, and to not be dismissive of the fact that some people, it's made them who they are today, and they can look back and say, you know what, it's messed up that I got injured there, but it was a butterfly effect that brought me to who I am today, and to not be dismissive of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you were making it, how do you remain objective, or were you able to, or did you find yourself identifying with like certain, I perceive there to be sides of the story, and I may be wrong in my head. And if I am, please tell me. But did you like switch sides? Did you identify with sides at times? Like how was that?
Yeah, when I make a documentary, when I'm interviewing somebody, it's very important, I think, to meet them on their own level and to try to understand them and to try to see their side and to empathize with their side. And what that means oftentimes, maybe less so with this and some other projects I'm working on, is, I feel when I'm in a room with somebody, I feel everything they're feeling. And then I might interview somebody else who's their antagonist, their nemesis, totally different perspective. And I try to feel everything they're feeling as well. And I try to make it clear who these people are and to treat them all fairly. And I think that's really important. If you come out of this film feeling very much sympathetic to one person over another, I hope that's not because we put our thumbs on the scale, but because your experiences, your perspectives, your whatever, they in some way click with whatever this person's saying, and you can relate to them in some way. We're not here to push somebody into one camp or another. We're here to tell you a story and to let you, almost like a Socratic method is how I like to do these things, let you come to your own conclusions. And I have my own conclusions. I do. But I think different people have different ones. And I love movies that foster debate. I love movies that don't give you easy answers, that make you think, that make you consider things you never considered, even if they don't change your mind.
Yeah, well, I think you did a very, very good job not tipping the scale. I really do.
Yeah.
And I watched it twice, and I thought about whether, the second time I was trying to see whether or not I thought you were tipping the scale, and I was like, no, I really don't think you did. So
yeah,
well done.
Thank
What are you working on now?
I got to say that old coy answer of can't talk about till it's officially announced type stuff. But I'm working on another movie that, here's the teaser I'll give for it. If Class Action Park was sort of my 80s movie, in many ways sort of like taking the language of like a Goonies or like a Stand By Me, this is my 90s action movie. So
very cool.
Yeah. So think like, less Goonies and more like Point Break or something like that.
If I remember one of your interviews correctly, you said Point Break was like a massively, like one of the movies that made a big impression on you. Is that fair?
Oh, I love that movie. Absolutely.
It's a great movie. That's why you love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like how you said that was the last movie that they actually had to use like stunt, like you had to create the stunt, right? There was no
I wouldn't say it's the last one, but I mean, like that era is like the last era. I mean, like those movies, and not just Point Break, of course, but like, 80s and then early mid 90s action films, everything changes once like The Matrix comes out. I love The Matrix. Yeah. Amazing movie. But it's, just starting to use computer effects and CG and kind of leave the reality of this grounded world of stunts. Movies like Point Break, like Patrick Swayze's actually skydiving, right? That's crazy. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
That's awesome. So now that you have had a success, is it easier to get the financing? Do you even want it, or do you want to do your own thing going forward? What's the decision on?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think with any field, success begets success, or at least it begets opportunities, shall we say, rather than surefire success. And I'm very fortunate that, this movie was a success, and it's given me the opportunity to make more movies without the same level of personal risk, I'll say. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not don't have that fear that's necessary, I think, to be creative or anything like that.
Well, that's good. I think that's why your next movies will be good.
Yeah, but the next projects I'm working on are ones that are as, if not more, personal to me. And I think to me, what really is required to make a movie good is really just having it feel very, very personal, if not on a literal level in the sense of like I went to Action Park, but on an emotional level where I began to really understand the people involved with it and see them and feel them and put myself into their shoes. And I think my next project, and I wish I could say more, I really, really do.
No, that's okay. I'll tell people follow Seth.
It's a movie that
the next movie, watch it.
It's a movie that is, I think, in many ways, much, much more personal to me than Class Action Park.
Very cool.
Yeah.
How has it been, once you get your movie and it's done, then what I assume you shop it to like the typical big places, right? Netflix, HBO, whatever. How was it making that decision?
Yeah, or
did they make it for you?
I mean, sort of, but
yeah.
I mean, we're lucky. Like, we're really blessed that we ended up with HBO Max. They've just been the best partners. And that's not me being a corporate shill, like, oh, they were great. No, like, they really were great. They're great creative partners. They're very supportive of our vision. And they did a really great job just making sure that people saw the movie, which is like every filmmaker just kind of wants at the end of the day. They want people to see their movie. But, I was in a lucky position because before our movie was done, I put a trailer out online that somehow got the New York Times attention. They did like a pretty lengthy feature on our film before it was done. And that's not common, for a movie that's not, for like a self-made documentary, it's not done. But it certainly meant that we had some attention and we're able to stand out a little, shall we say. So we were very blessed in that regard.
Well, I think the geography helped you in this case. I happen to have a fair amount of listeners in New York and New Jersey.
Sure.
And it's where some of my Twitter followers are too. And when I tweeted out that I was watching the movie, people were like, that movie is awesome, or Action Park was like the greatest place
scars.
ever.
Let me show you my scars.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing how many people I meet. And I was actually randomly one day, I met New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, and he tweets about Action Park on occasion. So I was like, hey, I'm the guy who made that Action Park thing. This was before the movie was out, when I just had the short out. He had tweeted about my short.
Oh, wow.
And he just gets like really excited. It's like Action Park, and starts lifting up his pant leg to show his scars from the Alpine slide. And it's like, man, like this place really left its mark, I guess, in more ways than one,
Yeah.
So
I used to go to an Alpine slide up in Vermont.
Yeah.
And then they turned it into like, there were these carts and you could go down the mountain on rocks. And my boy Jimmy was on one of the carts, and I T-boned him and he flipped out, and I thought I had killed him. But I didn't, thankfully, everything was fine. But, I just took my kids on an Alpine slide out in Colorado. It is way different than what we used to ride.
Oh, I mean, nowadays, like, they're designed so that you can't easily fly off the track. I mean, the problem with the Alpine slide at Action Park, as we say in the movie, it wasn't designed to keep you on,
Yeah.
It was just kind of very haphazard. And if you didn't know the right place to brake, the right way to redistribute your weight into a bank turn, you're going to fly off that track, period, end of story. And how would you know? Nobody's telling you when you get to this turn, do this. It kind of reminds me, I just keep thinking of that scene in Cool Runnings when they're like the pilot guy, Darius, his name is, it's like in the bathtub, just like memorizing every turn of the bobsled track, because he has to know every single turn like it's second nature, like it's muscle memory. And it's kind of what you needed to survive the Alpine track at Action Park, but it's just a bunch of kids going to an amusement park for a day. They're not training all night,
Yeah. I think the craziest thing that we haven't touched on yet is that kids legitimately ran this park.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Like it was all high schoolers.
Yeah, I mean, it was like everybody at Vernon High worked at Action Park. I mean, managers would be like sophomores in high school. They got in a little bit of trouble because many of the employees were illegally young. According to New Jersey state law, as we say in the film, you had to be 16 years old to operate a ride, which also seems very young, I might add, but not as young as the 14-year-olds who were doing it in actuality. Rides that could and did kill people were operated by children, just children. And you can't blame the kids for the fact that like they don't have the life experience, maturity, the training, the anything to be in a position to handle what these rides are actually capable of.
Yeah, indeed. If you're willing to go back into something slightly a little different,
sure,
I'd love for you to touch on this concept of trauma is not psychological, it's physiological. If you remember the speech that you gave that I'm referring to, when you said that, I thought that it was really interesting. And I'd be remiss if I had you here and we didn't sort of touch on that a little bit.
Sure. It's a topic that's very interesting. and I think important to me. And I think it's one at which people simply understanding can lead to real positive change in the world. Because I think a lot of people who experience trauma experience changes that are very mysterious to them. And that mystery creates problems when people begin to wonder things like, why is my digestion different? Why is my breathing different? Why are all these things happening in my body after this thing happens? And doctors don't have good answers for them. And what people don't understand, as you mentioned, is that trauma isn't so much solely a psychological or psychiatric issue as is a physiological one, in the sense that it causes changes in the nervous system that cause changes in how our body operates. And beginning to understand that, I think, is really, really key for people to find healing, to find therapeutic approaches that work for them. Because the traditional way we treat trauma is simply, here's some medication and some talk therapy. And if your hearing is different, as is very common with trauma victims, that's 70% of auditory processing disorders, or your digestion is different, you have IBS suddenly, about 70% of trauma victims have digestive or gut issues. Not understanding this, not treating it makes people feel like there's something wrong with them that they don't know. And I think it's important for people to understand those things, both so that they have a sense of awareness about what's actually going through them, and also the ability to deal with it.
I thought that was a very cool speech that you gave, and
Thank you.
People should look it up on the YouTube machine. If
yeah, just look up my name, Seth Porges, polyvagal theory. You'll find the video he's talking about.
Yeah. How'd you get interested in all that stuff?
I mean, that's the world I grew up in. I said, like, my parents are neuroscientists. It's just the world I grew up in. It's also a world in which, because of that, I've been exposed to so many people who have been through this and endured these mysterious changes that occur in the body. And I see very firsthand what it does to people when they don't understand their own experiences, and what it does to society when we don't understand other people's own experiences, right? So people might have these things, and then suddenly their hearing is different, and then their kids or their spouses think that they're ignoring them when they don't hear them properly, and they get angry, and it creates relationship issues. Scenarios where what people don't understand, where like assault victims themselves are often basically put on trial because they're told that there wasn't a sign of a struggle or a fight, that they weren't actually assaulted, not understanding that the natural physiological response to severe traumatic duress is oftentimes not fight or flight, but to freeze and shut down. And I just imagine a world in which everybody who see it on a jury knew that, right?
Yeah.
Knew that and didn't question whether people were actually assaulted because there's no sign of struggle, because that's what the body does. It's one of those things where I really realize it's like, man, simply knowing these things can create a sense of compassion, empathy, understanding for oneself as much as for others.
Yeah. Well, I look forward very much to your next project, and I wanted to make sure that we touched on that, because when I got to the end of the speech that you gave, I was like, all right, this is something that I think that we should at least touch on and redirect people to, right?
Yeah. So
if anyone wants to follow you or get in touch with you, where should they go?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and all that at Seth Porges. That's SethPorges. Say hey,
Yeah. Well, I wish you continued success. I thank you for a great, entertaining documentary, and more importantly, a really great piece of art. So thank you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. It is art. I'll take that.
Yeah. All right. Have a good one, man.
You too.